In the last 15 minutes, how EU pretends not to see Israel's calculated slaughter in Gaza. In the last hour, Natalie Portman is biggest canary in Israel's coal mine. Hamas says men gunned down in Malaysia was important member in the last 2 hours. 4 Palestinians killed in clashes at Gaza border. Protests in Gaza continue, leaving hundreds wounded and 37 dead. Why Natalie Portman is biggest canary in the Israel's coal mine in the last 4 hours. Child among 4 Palestinians killed during Friday's Gaza protests. Israel's Lieberman blames Hamas over Gaza deaths. Dead Gaza teenager ignored mother's warning. 15-year-old boy among 4 killed by Israeli snipers in Gaza in the last 6 hours. Israeli minister warns of resuming targeted assassinations of Hamas leaders in new Trump shift. U.S. removes occupied West Bank from annual report. 4 Palestinians dead, hundreds hurt in Gaza protest. EU says Israel must investigate death of Palestinian minor in Gaza. Clashes. Abbas cuts salaries of Gaza prisoners inside Israeli jails in the last 8 hours. Another 4 Palestinians killed in protests on Gaza-Israeli border. Freedom flotilla ships to sail against Israeli blockade. Family accuses Israel's Mossad of killing Palestinian in Malaysia. The latest, Israeli DM blames Hamas for boy's death earlier today. Palestinians seek independent probe of Israeli atrocities in Gaza. 4 Palestinians, including 15-year-old boy, killed in latest Gaza protest. Palestine calls for UN probe into Israeli killings in Gaza. Incendiary kite from Gaza causes fire in Israeli warehouse. None hurt. Palestinians demand probe in Israeli killings as 4 die in Gaza protests. Death toll hits 4 as Israeli army kills 2 Palestinians at Gaza border. UAE paper, make Israel accountable for brutal killings. 4 Palestinians killed by Israeli fire in Gaza border protest. Flaming kite from Gaza sets Israeli warehouse ablaze. Israel claim to probe Palestinian deaths. Nonsense. Israeli troops kill 4 Palestinians in border protest. Israel shoots dead 2 Palestinians after dropping leaflets. Kite bombs hit Israel from Gaza City thanks to heavy winds. 4 Palestinians killed in clashes with Israeli soldiers. Palestinians continue return protests along Gaza-Israel border. Portman refuses to pick up Israeli Nobel Prize over killing of protesters. Palestinians want independent probe of Israeli Gaza killings. IDF probing report. Video of 15-year-old said killed in Gaza clashes. Embattled Palestinian Knesset member fights for her people's rights. Palestine UN envoy calls for probe into Israeli crimes. Israel kills child and crushes bones in Gaza. Yesterday UN Middle East envoy slams killing of Palestinian teen in Gaza. 4 killed in fresh protests, clashes on Gaza-Israel border. State Department report cuts references to Israeli occupation. Gaza protest draws fewer people but remains deadly. Israeli soldiers kill 4 Palestinians, wound 700 at Gaza rally. Worthy and unworthy victims. UN envoy accuses Israel of killing innocent children in tweet. Israeli forces kill 4 Palestinians in Gaza border protests. Israeli fire in New Gaza border protest kills 4 Palestinians. Gaza border clashes. More protesters reported dead. UN envoy tells outrageous Israel to stop shooting children in Gaza. Palestinian death toll tops 4 in Gaza Strip. Gaza border protests turn deadly again amid clashes with Israeli forces. UN envoy accuses Israel of killing children. Natalie Portman rejects Israel prize in light of its crimes in Gaza. Palestinian succumbs to wounds sustained in Gaza protests. Israeli troops kill 4 more Palestinians in border protest. Israeli forces kill 2 at Gaza frontier during 4th week of protests. Watch Press TV News headlines. Erdogan urges Natalie Portman to tour Gaza border. 4 Palestinians killed in 4th week of demonstrations along Gaza border. Israeli forces kill 4 Palestinians on Gaza-Israel border. 4 killed in demonstrations at Gaza-Israel border. 4 Palestinians killed by Israel as Gaza protests intensify. Natalie Portman backs out of Israeli award ceremony. Firebomb kites breach Israeli territory. 4 die as clashes continue at border of Gaza Strip in Israel. Palestinians in Gaza are reminding us that they exist. Natalie Portman pulls out of Jewish Nobel over recent events in Israel. The latest, 2 more Palestinian protesters killed in Gaza. 2 shot dead in Gaza as protests enter 4th week. New clashes in Gaza, at least 2